Hey, what's up, everybody? God damn, does it feel good to finally have a moment of reprieve to talk about the 2023 roadmap and ArenaNet's plans for the game. I feel like every other content creator at this point has well and truly covered the news, but if for some reason you want to hear my thoughts on it, well, you're in luck, because that's what we're doing today. Needless to say, I have been very busy with real life stuff, but I was up checking my phone at 6 a.m. every morning, hoping for that 2023 roadmap post. And what do you know? Last week, ArenaNet graced us with this beautiful post about the future of Guild Wars 2 content. So let's just dive right in and address the elephant in the room. Living World is gone. Basically, ArenaNet are totally revamping their content model. Instead of doing an expansion every 2 to 4 years with Living World and extra bits of padding in between, they're essentially going to be doing just expansions, kind of. We'll be getting sort of like mini expansions with 2 strikes and 2 maps, then getting 1 new strike, 1 new map, and 1 new fractal throughout the rest of the year in the form of quarterly content updates. Specifically, these content updates will continue the story set up by that mini expansion and conclude with the final quarterly update before moving on to the next expansion. So I know everyone's immediately pulling out the ESO comparisons. They apparently follow a very similar sort of structure, but the best comparison I think is that of Destiny 2. Now, they also have a yearly expansion model with intermediary updates in between. I have sort of a love-hate relationship with that game. The seasonal content model definitely has its downsides, but for me, that's mostly to do with how the quarterly updates are so self-contained, and what little connecting plot threads exist get totally removed from the game by the time the next expansion rolls around. Thankfully, something that ArenaNet learned from all those years ago with Living World Season 1. On balance, though, that content model has had really reasonable success, especially with the yearly expansions, which always drum up a massive hype for the game, always a huge injection of new and returning players with every expansion. I think a big part of that is the fact that regular releases like this means the game gets regular marketing and generally pops up in conversation more often. And I'm hoping that has a similar effect with Guild Wars 2, because Lord knows Guild Wars 2 has had problems with marketing. Like, very rarely do people talk about Guild Wars 2, only when there's an expansion coming. And up until now, those expansions have been very few and far between. So on the topic of narrative, I really love that these quarterly updates will be continuations on the expansion, concluding with the final update. This is kind of reminiscent of the way that Final Fantasy XIV's patches work, where you play through the expansion on launch, but then the final ending to that story happens like a few patches later. It's actually the model that I wish Destiny 2 went with, so it's really cool to see that coming to Guild Wars. I'm also excited for these expansion stories not necessarily having to connect to one another. It means they have a lot more creative freedom to like tackle different stories and themes without being ham-fisted into the A plot. That said, I think there's a fine line here. I know ESO recently moved away from the expansions being so self-contained, so I do hope that there's at least some central plot thread connecting all this stuff. Otherwise, they'll find players struggling to get invested in the characters and plot of these short-term stints. But that's the story side. What about content? The meat and potatoes of every expansion. Well, the problem I have with this post is that I think it was very, very cagey on the particulars. We don't know whether everything they're talking about would take place over a 1-year cycle or longer. That's just what I'm going to assume for now, given that's how similar content models work. And they talked very specifically about how they were moving away from the 2 to 4 year cycle. Now, on paper, it kind of seems like less content, right? Instead of a big meaty expansions with 4 maps and 4 strikes or whatever, followed by 6 episodes or so of Living World, each with their own maps, events, masteries, etc. We instead are just getting half an expansion with the other parts of it segmented off to be delivered later. Now, it is a little weird when you look at it that way, but like, let's not kid ourselves here. I think the only period in Guild Wars 2 history that has had any sort of consistent content was between Living World Season 3, going into Path of Fire, and then into Season 4. Outside of that, we've really had like no consistent plan, no idea of what's coming next, just assumptions. Here's the thing though, like assuming this is on a 1-year cycle, assuming ArenaNet stick to their guns, this would mean every 2 years we now get 6 strikes, 6 maps, and 2 fractals. Compare that to the last 2 years, which I think is more of a relevant comparison here, where we basically just had EOD and the Living World Season 1 return, which all up gave us 5 strikes and 4 maps. The last fractal came at the end of 2020, so having any new fractals at all would be like a 1 billion% increase. Overall, if we're comparing the current standard with the new one going forward, I do feel like we get more content. What else are we getting though? We really don't know. I really hope we get more clarification on this, because at the moment it's just kind of like really vague wording. We know we'll be getting masteries. They also said they'll be adding new combat features. To me, this basically confirms no new elite specs going forward. ArenaNet know how marketable elite specs are, and I think they would have outright said it here if they wanted to add more. This doesn't really bother me, to be honest. I think we've got enough specs in the game to contend with, and it's already a bit chaotic in terms of balance. Now, you've got to remember, we get quarterly balance updates, and I really do believe that the elite specs that we have right now will keep undergoing reworks and eventually reach their full potential. I do think that after all these number passes and light reworks, we'll go through a sort of playstyle fix-up phase to really make the elite specs properly specialized, and we won't have any outlying niches or class fantasies that need to be fulfilled. Like, they'll really take a hammer to a lot of these trait lines that are sort of all-rounders instead of focusing on one aspect of play, like support or whatever. I am hopeful that this happens at some point, and I think it needs to happen if we don't get any more elite specs moving forward. What I can see them doing is just kind of giving classes access to new weapons or utilities without the actual elite spec component. An idea that's always excited me is some kind of combat stances system or weapon arts kind of thing, where you pick a thing and it completely changes the skills on your existing weapon sets. So for example, if your hammer is really heavy on like CC abilities, you can pick a stance that converts those skills into more DPS or even support-centric abilities. You could turn a weapon's condition damage skills into like power damage-based skills or something. Wooden Potatoes did a cool video as well, where he talked about this idea of universal cultural elite specs. It's an idea that I can really get behind, to be honest. This idea of like a 4th trait line where you gain extra traits and abilities associated with an in-game race or culture. Like, for example, I can imagine a ogre trait line that gives you a pet, or a Codan trait line that lets you transform into Coda, or a Corsair one that gives you a massive buckshot CC ability. But either way, all these ideas are kind of like more exciting to me than a new elite spec now. It means that if I really like Vindicator, for example, I don't have to give that up to play with some new toys. I don't know, food for thought. There's so many directions they can go with this. At the end of the day, I just want new abilities, and however they do that doesn't really matter to me. Now, they note as well that they want to continue to add the extra little quality of life updates alongside these patches. They give the example of a queue system for full PvE maps, but I'd personally like to see them do something about the crazy spell effects from other players, or fix up the insanely bloated buff bar, or add better ways to track class mechanic buffs, etc. There's all sorts of stuff they can do. Here's hoping. Now, on ArenaNet's side, this is a much more consistent revenue model, as they can actually sell that expansion content more regularly. Granted that they did say the expansions will be sold at a lower price to account for their size, as well as making those quarterly updates always free for owners of that expansion, as opposed to Living World, where you need to buy the episodes later if you missed them. Am I upset that I have to pay an extra $10 to $20 per year? Not really. I mean, it's always been super whack to me that the expansions are as cheap as they are for the amount of content you get, and that the Living World is all completely free if you log in when they came out. I mean, if you look at Destiny, you kind of have to pay for every one of those Living World updates or get a season pass. We get like $20 mount skins added to the game very regularly, and nobody bats an eye. So I think it's kind of overdue that ArenaNet gets some consistent return on their investment when it comes to actual playable content developed for the game. Now, believe me, I hear the Icebrood Saga comparisons, but I don't really subscribe to that idea. different teams, different philosophies. Basically, back then, ArenaNet put forward this idea of let's just do Living World forever and promised expansion level features. I am air quoting, you can't see it. But yeah, this is a line which gets memed on to this day since they never really delivered on that. What ArenaNet is proposing now is let's just do expansions forever, but deliver it like Living World. I guess on the surface, there isn't really a huge difference between those two statements, but to me, it indicates a positive direction. It has a more positive connotation. It indicates to me that ArenaNet understand the importance of expansions, the importance of expansion features, rather than sidelining all that for just more content. At the end of the day, actions speak louder than words, and the ball is in ArenaNet's court to prove that they have the confidence and manpower to make this model work. The real litmus test on how well this model pans out is how meaty these quarterly updates are. Luckily, we'll be able to find out soon enough because the first one is dropping on the 28th of February, just as your boy predicted. That's right, ArenaNet did confirm that the next chapter of the End of Dragon story will be dropping in just over a week from now, alongside a new map as well. All we know is that it's located deep within the Jade Sea. Lots of speculation about the new location literally being the Deep from Guild Wars 1. I don't know much about it aside from having to do with the demons, which is cool as hell, and I'm absolutely all for it. But yeah, we've been waiting a full year for this next chapter, and this will set our expectations for future content. So they really need to put their best foot forward with this release. No pressure, ArenaNet. Anyway, that's my thoughts on this studio update. Weirdly enough, I got the impression that this post was supposed to cover like all the events and updates happening this year in 2023, but it kind of didn't. They only sort of have like a timeline here that ends in May, and it doesn't seem to include the Fractal or Strike either. So are we not getting like any new instanced PvE content until June at the earliest? Ugh. Also, no real mention of PvP. My heart goes out to you guys, but at least there was a World versus World rewards tuning patch that went out a couple days ago, and that seems to be going well, so I'm pretty keen to check that out. We also had that balance patch last week. I had plans to cover it, but I'm not sure if I'll have time now. I really need to get a feel for some of these new builds first, so we'll see. And last of all, I apologize for the late video as usual. I recently moved and I have literally been working and unpacking simultaneously over the last week or two. No time for gaming, but rest assured, I have kept myself in the loop with the goings on. I was on the Tea Time podcast. That's over at the Mighty Teapot channel. We talked about the LFG and the balance patch. So yeah, if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link in the description. And yeah, lots in store for this year. Thanks ArenaNet for again dropping your content on the exact same day as Destiny 2. My work-life balance is in shambles. Give the like button a little doot if you enjoyed the video. And as always, I'll catch you later.